Please allow me to introduce myself. At the age of 5, I ran away from home, and as I walked down the street from my apartment, I realized I had nowhere to go. Although I did not know it at the time, I had an epiphany. I can't do this alone. My first recollection of my mother was in Joliet Prison, Illinois. I was born into Chicago's inner city, poverty-stricken, crime-infested, with a mother addicted to heroin. My grandmother, bless her soul, did her best. She kept me safe. She provided me a home. She was born into misery in the Deep South, often on edge, angry, full of disappointments. Her constant, daily yelling at me ringed in my ears decades after it stopped. She taught me about kindness when she was her most angry. I can never forget her most memorable line when she told me my birth story. "You were a piece of trash, born in a toilet. Your mother wrapped you in newspaper, and I saved you from being thrown out in the garbage." My grandmother's vision for me was that one day I would be a mail carrier, like the father I never knew. Found dead, strangled, shot in the head, one of the many casualties, the many alleyways of Chicago. At 10, I had another epiphany. It doesn't have to be this way. Others people's expectation for my future doesn't have to be mine. 50 years ago, 35,000 Chicagoans, Chicago students, walked out of their classrooms in protest. The 1968 high school walkout was an expression of growing dissent among students of Chicago, students of color. Years of disinvestment by Chicago public schools in the education of non-white students like me had significant barriers, significant consequences. When I was 8 years old, I met a lady named Sue Duncan. The Sue Duncan Children's Center opened in my neighborhood, initially turned down. I lobbied continuously to join the center. Although I didn't know it at the time, persistence would become a theme. Ray Kroc's message, "Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence," rings true. Sue Duncan's Children's Center was a transformational game changer for me as an augmentation to my education. Sue Duncan, the energetic founder of the center, would come to like and believe in me. Her daughter, Sarah, a graduate of Harvard University, said to me, of all her educational pursuits, the center was the only experience that she found truly transformational. The Children's Center changed my trajectory as well. It was a high-touch, collaborative experience. Years after I left the center, Sue and I would reminisce on her role as my quasi-mother in my formative years. Even then, I wasn't done growing. With Sue's believing in me, I made it to the university, the first in my family. But I was placed on academic probation in the second year of my education. And I realized that the kindness of strangers matters. In my case, the simple confidence of a math professor who saw potential and talent in me. And if he had told me that I would be invited to be my alma mater's commencement speaker, be conferred a doctorate honorary degree, I would have shaken, my head would have smiled, I would have smiled, and I would have laughed in disbelief. I learned early and often in life that I would need to bury the person I was seemingly born to become the person I wanted to be. Upon graduating, the first of my family, dating back as far as genealogy takes us, I decided no more complacency, no more doing less than my best, no more blaming others for the unfairness of life, childhood, education, etc., because blaming others is truly one of the biggest wastes of time that any of us can undertake. Game on. My first job as a programmer required we write 3 case studies. We had to finish on time, we keep our jobs, we get assigned to a project, we don't finish, we lose our jobs. Coincidentally, I joined this training program at the same time of 2 other students from my alma mater. I happened to know them not well, but they were both A students, unlike me. During the 3-month training program, they finished their case studies in rapid, accelerated time. I took a different path. I would learn as much about the technology as possible. I decided that mastery was more important than finishing the job. We all got the job, but my career advanced a lot faster in those first 5 years. Mastery is excellence. Mastery of a subject, mastery of a discipline. Mastery is your most important currency. My name is Kerrie Holley. A few things I've accomplished in the years since, including publishing a few books, a dozen or so patents, named one of the few people in the world to be named a technology fellow by multiple Fortune 100 companies. So begins the story of designing yourself. I often ask a question when mentoring people: can you see how you look to others? And most people answer, how could I possibly know? A few say no, some say yes, some say maybe. And I challenge you. I think that all of us should be able to answer the question positively. I think all of us should be able to answer the question, yes, minimally, sometimes. And I say, everyone has a mother, a boyfriend, a classmate, a colleague, a friend, a mentor. Find the right time, find the right moment, and ask the right questions. Learn how to see insights versus bias and grow. I mentored a young woman, someone I thought was very talented, and I was seeking to elevate her responsibilities on a particular project. And I was told by peers that they didn't think she was very talented. In fact, they didn't think she was very smart. And I was shocked. I spoke to her, we talked about it, and I asked if she had ever gotten feedback on her performance, and she responded no. And I said, why? She said, well, I never thought to ask the question. She didn't ask the right questions. When talking with friends about jobs who've just finished interviews, I'm always shocked and surprised when they don't know how they did on the interview. I don't understand. Why didn't you ask the simple question of the interviewer, how did I do? Do you have any concerns or issues I can address? Ask the right questions at the right time. A continuous activity in designing yourself is all about Q&A, the Socratic approach, asking the right questions at the right time. It's a continuous activity to design yourself. Sometimes advice is handed to you, as it was to me on my first interview. So this was before that first job. I remember coming out of the university. I remember going to that first interview in a red jacket, not a sports jacket, mind you, just a red, very bright red jacket, casual. I answered all the questions of the interviewer. And at the end of the interview, I remember to this day his comment, his position, and he said, hey, let me give you a little advice. Keep that jacket at home. Be more responsive in your answers. Stop the yes and no's. And it was at that point that I decided to get better. In my case, I bought a rummage sale jacket, cheap sports jacket. Promised myself, though, that I would do better. The world has changed considerably since then, as there was a time we could look at our careers like a checkerboard, moving up, moving sideways, moving up. But today the world is more like a chessboard. We may move backwards, we may move sideways, we may move up. It's not about moving. It's about the experiences, about the portfolio, it's about the body of work you create. That's what designing yourself is all about, creating a body of work. It doesn't matter what profession you're in. It doesn't matter what activity you do, whether you're a mechanic, whether you're a software engineer, whether you're a teacher, whether you're an artist. Your body of work represents, codifies who you are and your experiences and becomes a springboard to more and future opportunities. Melody, my wife, chides me about one of my favorite expressions. Don't be captive to the trash bin of your experiences. She often says, what the heck does that mean? And I say, well, often in life we fail to challenge the most domain assumptions, culturally derived beliefs. We let the media create our weather. We let others shape our experience. This is the trash bin of our experiences. And it's what we must work at to avoid. We must be open to creativity, new ideas, new thinking, and the destiny we decide, the destiny that we choose. Each of us must decide. We must decide and how we present ourselves. And some will say that our communication style is more important than our talent, or our talent is more important than our communication style, or our political savvy. And I would argue they're all important. How we communicate, how we persuade. I remember a senior guy some decades ago, and he complained about the fact that his customer simply wasn't getting it. His customer simply wasn't following his direction. And I realized at that time, and still today, it's not the customer's responsibility to get it. It's our responsibility to persuade. It's our responsibility to influence. It's your responsibility. And if we ever find ourselves blaming others, we should take a step back and look at what we can do differently to teach, to mentor, to persuade, to influence. So your talent, your communication style is highly important. All of us should have an elevator pitch. If you should be in the elevator with a CEO of your company, you should be able to answer the question when asked, what do you do? And it can't just be, I'm a software engineer. It can't just be, I'm a teacher. It's got to be more profound. You've got probably less than 20 seconds. What's most important? Who are you? I often hear people say, it's who you know that counts. And I say just the opposite. I'd say it's who knows you that counts. And I'm reminded of one of my early experiences with a company that was going through some financial difficulties, and layoffs were on the horizon. And I remember participating in this activity of deciding who was going to get laid off. And what struck me as interesting after the fact was how those decisions were made. They weren't solely made on talent. Talent, of course, was a factor. But the other factor that was made was, do I know this person? Now, that's not the question that was asked, but when names would come up to be subject to consideration, if no one knew that person, then they didn't know of that person's body of work. So this is why I emphasize, this is why I stress, it's who knows you that counts. These people were invisible. When we think about our challenges in life, I think about my efforts to be a IBM fellow. And if you don't know what that role means, in all technology companies, there's a role called fellow. It typically reflects the highest technical position that you can have in a technology company. In the case of IBM, where I was made a fellow, that appointment was made by the CEO. But my point is that long before I became a fellow, I had to discard a belief system because I was arguably going up against Nobel laureates, and I could easily make the case, they're smarter than me, they're better than me, they're more connected. I could make up a ton of excuses. I don't play politics, I'll lose my skills in X, Y, or Z. I can't do this. I don't know how to do this. The point is that these are all excuses. And this is what is meant by creating barriers and creating bricks that eventually becomes walls to prevent us from achieving our best. I remember running into a colleague once who had published over 100 books. And this was not the most technical, outstanding engineer in the world, but yet he had published books on a wide spectrum of topics. And what I learned from him is that that's how he learned. That was one of his techniques of learning, was to write about something he didn't know. That's risk-taking, that's adventuresome, that's putting yourself at risk. It's a good thing to do. There's all sorts of barriers we have when we think about how we design ourselves. We ask, perhaps unfairly, that people who do really well are smarter than average. People who do really well are more driven, more ambitious. They work longer hours. They're more satisfied with their jobs. These are all possibly true, possibly false. But the point is that they're myths. There are people who are highly successful who are simply better at their job than others. There are some that simply master how they do their job better than others. But the point is that there is no one formula. We will all choose different paths, but each of our journeys will be unique and different. As a minority, we often run into the challenge, and the question is, can we advance as fast and as rapidly as others? Our minorities and women, can they be seen? Are they part of this, quote, good old boys network? And what I've learned is that, yes, there are challenges, unique challenges being a woman. There are unique challenges being a minority. And in many cases, it's not fair. In many cases, we have to work harder or differently. But at the end of the day, a lot of it is about shared experiences. A lot of it is about persistence. So moving forward, we've talked about it's more important that people know you. And how can people get to know you? This is, again, what designing yourself is all about. You can blog. If you think about what we can do in social media, which we couldn't do 30 years ago, it's phenomenal. The opportunity to make your mastery self-evident and evidenced by others is enormous. So, one of the key things we have to do is break down these barriers. So, when you're in that elevator, you have to ask yourself the question, what's most important? Who are you? This becomes the basis of your elevator speech. All of us must do a very simple task when we think about designing ourselves, and that's self-assessment. Do we anticipate and solve problems? Are we asked first to be part of project teams? Do we meet our commitments? If you can't answer positively to those questions, go back and assess. How do others assess you? How do others perceive you? One of the ways you can do that, as I've said before, is talk to your friends. Talk to your colleagues. Ask the right questions. Don't be defensive. What does it mean not to be defensive? It means to not cry. It means to be open to criticism. And it doesn't mean that all criticism is correct. We have to listen. We have to take what works, discard what doesn't. One of the other lessons I've learned in life as a result of having children is how to learn from children. I never really understood what that expression meant until I had kids. And I remember my youngest child at the time, Hugo, was not the most articulate. He's quite articulate today as a college student. But at that time, I realized that he would speak the English language in a most horrific way, but it didn't stop him from speaking. And that's something that we all must learn how to do. We must learn how to take risks. We must learn how to go forward, how to pursue things that we're not good at, that maybe would be embarrassing. I'm also reminded of our interactions with each other, our collaborations. When people stop bringing their problems to you, that's a problem. I remember working with a colleague who was complaining to me about the fact that they couldn't get their work done because so many people were interrupting them, so many people were coming into their office, so they would close their office. In some cases, they would have frowns on their faces. And I would say, I was reminded of a story by Chuck Yeager in one of his autobiographies, where he told the story of being a World War II pilot, and he told the story of seeing this squadron of planes coming at them, and they were outnumbered. And his colleagues said, "What do we do? What do we do?" And Chuck responded, "This is a time to rejoice. This is what we're here for." And that's what we're all here for. We're all here to help each other. So my point to my colleague was, this is a time to rejoice. If you can't find a way to transfer your knowledge in a more productive way, then that fault lies with you. But don't close your door. Rejoice when people come to you. It shows that you've arrived. It shows that mastery is upon you. I also remember doing a project for a bank, and when we talk about designing yourself, the strategy is one of the most significant aspects of companies, but it's also the most significant aspect of you and I. What is the strategy that we should be embracing about designing ourselves? I would assert that that strategy is all about your development. It's all about our development plans. And I would ask, do you have a development plan? Is it measurable? Does it look 1 year out? Does it look 3 years out? It should do both. If you have a financial plan, you can look at that and easily ascertain if it's working. But you should be able to do the same with your development. You should be able to look a year from now and say, and go back and look at your development plan and ask the simple question, did I achieve these objectives, whatever they might be? Those objectives might be around skills, they might be around talents, they might be around income, they might be around roles. The point is, you've got to have a development plan. It's got to have a tactical and a strategic focus to it. And you've got to measure the outcomes every single year because time flies rapidly and the development plan is significant. I remember sitting with a vice chair of a bank, and I was surprised when he said to me that, you know, I could leave my strategy on a plane and I wouldn't be worried because it's all about execution. And that's what I caution, that's what I advise. When you talk about designing yourself, your development plan, which is in effect your strategy for designing yourself, it's all about execution. The plan is the roadmap, the plan is the strategy, but you have to make it real. You have to execute. When we think about designing ourselves, enthusiasm is paramount. I will take the leader's enthusiasm over cynicism and pessimism every single day. Leaders who whine engender these traits in others. The unrealistic aspirations of the optimist should never be favored over the grim litany of the realist. When I went to law school, I was surprised on day one of law school by a couple of things. Day one, the professors asked us, did you read these 5 books? And I was shocked. I'm like, what? This is day one. But that's preparation. We should have been prepared. But the more important thing that I learned was 3 simple things. And our professors made this very clear on day one of law school, that they're going to teach us how to read, how to write, and how to think. And I know it sounds pretty basic, but it's one of the biggest failings of designing ourselves is our failure to understand what those words mean. Reading is not about comprehension. It's not about turning the pages. It's about critical thinking and understanding what you read and being able to ask the right questions. Writing is about succinctly expressing your thoughts in a way that's purposeful and has impact. And thinking is all about challenging your culturally derived beliefs, your domain assumptions, and not falling into what I described earlier as the trash bin of your experience. The greatest value in reading is not the reading itself. It's what we think about what we read. And a lot of us think we're thinking when all we're doing is rearranging our prejudices. So when you talk about designing yourself, some more tips. All of us should have a journal. Whether you do that through blogging, whether you do that through tools like Evernote, doesn't matter. But we should have a journal of everything we've read, not because we're trying to record that we read 20 books, but we're trying to record the insights from those 20 books. We're trying to inspire ourselves now or later on books or patents or articles that we should be developing. We should take time to reflect, whether that's meditation, whether that's yoga, whether that's running, whether that's vacation, but it's got to be a part of our strategy. We've got to read. I believe we all should be reading at least a book a month. And I promise you that if you take your profession, whether it's a medical profession, whether it's a software engineer, doesn't matter. If you read a book a month, at the end of 12 months, at the end of 36 months, you will find your ability to articulate concepts, your ability to be a critical thinker will substantially improve. And the book should be a mixture. Some of your book should be in your chosen profession in terms of the mastery that you choose. Let's say that's programming or operating systems or containers, it doesn't matter. Or, rather, it should also be about the field that you're in, the domain. So if you're in finance, books about finance. And then thirdly, you should have books that simply entertain you, whether it's sci-fi, romance, doesn't matter. And lastly, and most importantly, remember, we've got to get feedback from others. We've got to continuously see if we're improving. We do that by looking at our development plan, and we do that by talking to our colleagues and friends. I'm reminded of a quote by Einstein that the birds of worry and care fly above our heads. This we cannot change, but that they build nests in our hair, this we can prevent. So day one, now, it's time. Let's build that development plan. Thank you very much.